I think the worst thing about NBA fans right now is that even if you give them what they want, they'll still complain. And you might be thinking, what are you talking about? What's the point of this video? Well, the main topic of this video is the NBA Finals and the way that they're being perceived, right? Because there were reports about Game 1, Game 2, and Game 3 being kind of lower in viewership, which is to be expected because these NBA Finals have not been promoted well at all. And there's continuously these takes that come out about how, oh, well, there's no LeBron and there's no Steph, there's no KD in these finals, so who cares? And it gets me thinking, like, isn't this what people want? Isn't this the type of matchup that people would want or people would be interested in? Like, theoretically, if the NBA actually promoted their product well and they promoted these storylines well between these two teams, why wouldn't these finals average like 15 million per game? Why wouldn't these finals average good viewership? Like, the storyline of these finals have been the Pacers who were completely doubted. Nobody had any faith that they would make it this far. They're kind of like this Cinderella team throughout this whole playoffs. They've dominated teams like Milwaukee and New York, came back from crazy deficits, came back from these insane circumstances, and on top of that, you add Tyrese Halliburton's clutchness in these playoffs. It's been insane. They knocked off the Cavs, who are the number one seed. Like, they've been great. And then you have a team like OKC, who's just been dominant throughout this entire run. Yeah, they went to 7 against Denver, but they were dominant in that Game 7. They dominated the Timberwolves. They dominated the Memphis Grizzlies. SGA is the MVP, and he's been playing like the MVP throughout this whole playoffs. But it hasn't been presented that way, which is really irritating. All season long, people were projecting that the Lakers were going to knock off the Thunder because they had Luka Doncic now. Like, all this nonsense, right? And so far, this series has been great. Every single game besides Game 2 was close. This should be something that the fans want. This should be something that the fans continuously push for every single year. Like, do y'all remember, like, 6 years ago, we were complaining about LeBron and Steph being in the finals every single year. A whole 4-year stretch where the Cavs and the Warriors would make it every single year. There was very little competition that they had to face for real. Like, the only competition that either team really had to face was that 2018 Houston team, and then you also had in 2016 that Raptors team that took the Cavs to 6 games. Other than that, both the Cavs and the Warriors dominated their way to the finals every single year. Even in 2015, when you had the Atlanta Hawks, who had that great season, they completely fell apart when they faced LeBron James. In 2017, the Warriors didn't lose a single game up until Game 3 of the NBA Finals, or Game 4 of the NBA Finals, whichever game that they lost. They were completely dominant in that NBA playoffs, and people were making their voices heard. They were saying, we don't want this. Like, where's the parity? And they were blaming Kevin Durant for it. They were saying Kevin Durant ruined parity, which he did. But at the same time, the NBA Finals viewership were the highest they ever were. I believe like 33 million people tuned into that finals. In 2016, I believe it was like 20-something million. And that was an actual good final series. That was a very compelling storyline where you had the Warriors, who were dominant that entire season, 73 wins and things like that. And then you had Steph, who's the unanimous MVP. And you got LeBron James, who at that point in time, he only had 2 rings to his name. That was a very legacy-defining series for LeBron, and he pulled through and won the series for the Cavaliers. First title in franchise history. That series immortalized a lot of players. Like, it immortalized LeBron as arguably the greatest of all time. It immortalized Kyrie Irving as one of the greatest point guards that we've ever seen play. And that series is used as an argument as to why Kyrie is better than some people today. But yeah, that 4-year stretch from 2015 to 2019, there was absolutely little to no parity in the NBA. If anything, there were like 3 or 4 teams that really realistically had a chance at winning it all. And the majority of those teams came from the Western Conference. From 2015 to 2018, it was either the Cavs in the East, and then in the West, you had the Warriors, OKC, or Houston. In the later parts, it was mainly Houston, and then maybe one of the other teams got lucky. Like, For example, when Portland made it to the conference finals. But you knew certain teams like the Utah Jazz, the Spurs at times, even teams like the Portland Trailblazers who made it to the Western Conference Finals, they had absolutely no chance against teams like Cleveland. If the Portland Trailblazers faced a team like Toronto, they would have got ran out the building. And the arguments that I'm making aren't even about viewership. It's mainly just about the comparison between both teams, the parity in the NBA, and it just wasn't there. But for some reason, there hasn't been a drop in viewership. The viewership has only gone higher. You know what I mean? And I think the other main problem is ever since the Warriors era ended, there hasn't been a back-to-back champion. And the NBA has done everything it could to limit the amount of super teams made, to essentially give newer teams a better opportunity at winning it all and making it past those points in the playoffs where they just can't get over the hump. Like imagine if a team like the Raptors during the LeBronto era, imagine if they were around today, they would have a way higher chance of making it because they don't have to deal with LeBron for 4 straight years. And then on top of that, you also consider the fact that certain teams just don't last as long as they used to. You got teams like Boston who are going to have to make significant changes this offseason. You got teams like OKC who look like a dynasty right now, but in 2 to 3 years, they could look completely different due to the second apron rules. Teams like New York who had to trade for a Karl Anthony Towns. Teams like Minnesota who had to trade a Karl Anthony Towns in order to save money. The second apron rules are really what are dictating, how long these teams stick around. And, you don't have to agree with the second apron, and you could think that it's ruining the league. But the fact that there hasn't been a repeat champion since 2018, 2017, something like that, the fact that there hasn't been back-to-back champions since then should be a good thing. And NBA fans shouldn't be complaining about this. The viewership should be the best it's ever been, realistically, because this is what people wanted. But the truth is, people are way more compelled with the idea of a David versus Goliath storyline, right? It's the same thing in the NFL. The NFL, you have Kansas City who win all the time. They're like 4-time Super Bowl champions or something like that. But the one time that Kansas City isn't in the Super Bowl, I believe it was in 22 when the Bengals and the LA Rams were in it. I believe the viewership was a lot lower than the year prior when Brady won. And people cheered for when Brady won because he took down the dynasty that was Kansas City. And that's essentially the point I'm trying to make. People, whether they like to admit it or not, they enjoy dynasties. I personally don't enjoy dynasties because I like seeing fresh matchups in the NBA Finals. Like when the Bucks and Suns matched up, that was a great NBA Finals. The uncertainty in which teams aren't going to win and they have an opportunity to win. Even like the 2022 NBA Finals is a good finals because it was like that reclaiming of the throne type storyline, right? Where the Warriors, who hadn't been good in a few years, they had lost Kevin Durant, they lost Klay Thompson to injuries, they were a lot older. The storyline of that NBA Finals was like bringing the old band back together for one last dance, right? It was like the last dance of the NBA Finals, And ever since then, the Warriors have been god-awful, Like, the Warriors, they made it to the playoffs this year, but they were so obviously the inferior team. It wasn't even funny, And then in years prior, they just get bounced out in the play-in or in the first round. Like, the Warriors have not been what they were in that 22 season. I believe they were even the number 1 seed in the 22 season. But to the overall center point of this video, NBA fans got what they wanted. They get competitive playoff series, they get competitive NBA final series like the Bucks versus the Suns, but these final series are not reflected in viewership because of how poorly the NBA promotes their product. And then you have the face of the league conversations, right? There's this incessant need to have these conversations. Me personally, I think they're very pointless, but let's entertain them for the sake of this video. You have a guy in SGA who is one of the most talented scorers in the league, somebody who attacks the basket at a will. You have somebody great in the mid-range, right? Good playmaker. He's on a good team. He's fairly popular with like the younger demographic, but for some reason SGA isn't viewed as a superstar nor a potential face of the league, and I think that is a travesty. Instead, he's just viewed as a free throw merchant because of this dumb narrative that came up, because of NBA Twitter and things like that. It was this really dumb narrative that isn't true, that SGA is a free throw merchant and he's a foul baiter. The foul baiting thing is what really irritates me, because it's like a lot of the times there's times where SGA does act a little bit for a foul, but there's other times where he's legitimately being grabbed. His arm may get twisted up with the defender's arm or things like that, or the defender is just straight up hacking him and they call the foul. But you have people like Jalen Brunson, Dwayne Wade in the past, Paul George at times, Kevin Durant with his rip-through move, Trae Young. You got all these guys who routinely foul bait, and they routinely have these tricks where they end up drawing a lot of fouls, and it takes no skill at all. They're just flailing their body everywhere. Like James Harden used to do this shit all the time. Dwayne Wade was literally the inventor of it when he did the pump fake and he would lean into the defender while he's shooting to generate a foul call. A lot of the times SGA drives to the basket and he ends up getting the foul call because he's one of the best drivers in the entire league. SGA is like top 3 in drives per game, and he generates only like 8 free throws a game. Meanwhile, you have Joel Embiid, who literally flops, like shamelessly. He's so shameless about it too. He flops nearly every single possession, yet he hasn't had the whole free throw merchant narrative completely destroy his argument for being like one of the best players in the NBA. NBA fans claim they want, guys to ISO more. They want guys to shoot in the mid-range more. Well, you got SGA, you got Anthony Edwards, you have guys like Giannis who are shooting more mid-range shots and perfecting that part of their game. The mid-range is not completely dead, A lot of people like to throw around this term that, analytics destroy the NBA. Analytics killed the mid-range shot. But at the end of the day, players like SGA are still taking mid-range shots. Like, the mid-range is not dead. Even look at a guy like Jason Tatum. He still takes those mid-range pull-ups. The only thing analytics ever did is just, take out the horrible mid-range shots that are inefficient. Even look at a guy like Devin Booker. He still has that Kobe-esque, skill set in the mid-range. Again, it's a lot easier to throw narratives around and say this guy's a free throw merchant or say this thing is ruining the NBA. But if you actually watch the games, which a lot of people don't do, you can see it for yourself. And this might be another video, but I really have to talk about how the NBA is just fumbling their opportunity at having a successful league, because there's too much talent in the NBA for the viewership to be as low as it is, and on top of that, for the league to feel as irrelevant as it's been feeling. Like the NBA is still vastly popular, but there's nothing that's drawing the casuals in. I feel like the NBA is a very diehard or not league at this point. And it's partially a fan problem, but it's mostly like the NBA itself and Adam Silver's fault that this is the state of the league right now. But that's the end of this video. If you like this video, make sure to hit that like button down below, subscribe for more, and I'm out. Peace.